Davis Caldwell had everything a man could want. Money, more than he could spend in 3 lifetimes. Power. His name was on buildings across Chicago. When he walked into a boardroom, people stopped mid-sentence to look at him. In Chicago's financial world, when Davis Caldwell entered a room, the energy shifted. Conversations adjusted. People stood a little straighter. He had built that effect the hard way, coming up from nothing on the southwest side of the city, working with his hands before he worked with his mind, learning the rules of money by watching what happened to people who didn't understand them. At 38, he was the proof of everything he had ever believed about discipline and sacrifice and the willingness to outwork everyone around you. His name was on 3 buildings visible from the highway. His calls got returned within minutes. His decisions moved markets. But for all of it, the empire, the reputation, the suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent, there was one thing missing. One hollow space that no deal could fill, no matter how large, no matter how perfectly structured. 6 months ago, he had come home to a closet full of empty hangers and a wedding ring sitting on the kitchen counter like a period at the end of a sentence he had never seen coming. No note, no call, no explanation. Just absence, clean and total, like she had simply decided to stop existing in his world. Like the 3 years of their marriage had been a book she had quietly finished and returned to the shelf without telling him she was done reading. He had told himself he was over it. He had gone back to work the next morning and he had not stopped working since, and that was what over it looked like for Davis Caldwell. You built something larger than the pain. You made the pain irrelevant by making the work enormous enough to fill every space the pain might otherwise occupy. He was good at that. He had been doing it since he was 19 years old. Tonight was supposed to be the proof. Tonight, he would close the deal of his life and prove, to himself more than anyone, that Davis Caldwell needed no one. That he was complete. That the empty hangers and the ring on the counter had not taken anything from him that he could not replace with something better. He had no idea that she was already inside the building. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Before we go any further into tonight's story, please take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe so you never miss a new story from us. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? Are you in Chicago, Atlanta, London, maybe Toronto, Nairobi, or right there in your living room somewhere in the American South? We love hearing from you. Every single comment means the world to us. Now let's get into the story, because it is one you are not going to forget. The event was called the Pinnacle Summit, and it was held on the 40th floor of Caldwell Tower, a building that bore Davis's name in 4-foot steel letters above the entrance on Michigan Avenue. The ballroom was something out of a dream that only a very specific kind of money could construct. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Chicago skyline on 3 sides like a living painting, the lake dark and vast in the distance, the city's lights beginning to come alive in the early evening gold, the highway below a slow river of headlights moving in both directions like the city's pulse made visible. Crystal chandeliers, 3 of them, each one the size of a small car, threw warm amber light across white linen tables set for 200 guests. The floors were polished to a mirror shine. The servers moved in white gloves, silent and precise, threading between conversations with silver trays held perfectly level. The air carried the faint scent of fresh flowers and something expensive underneath, the particular atmosphere of a room where everyone present understood that tonight mattered. And everyone in that room had either inherited money or made it the hard way. CEOs of companies that employed tens of thousands of people. Venture capitalists whose decisions shaped entire industries. A city commissioner who had the mayor's personal number saved under a first name. A state senator who had flown in from Springfield specifically for this evening. Hedge fund managers, real estate developers, the kind of people who didn't need name tags because everyone in a room like this already knew exactly who they were. Davis moved through all of it with the ease of a man who had belonged in rooms like this long before rooms like this belonged to him. Every handshake he gave was firm and brief and landed exactly where it needed to. Every greeting was warm enough to feel genuine and efficient enough to keep him moving. He had done this 1,000 times, worked a room, read the temperature of a crowd, made each person feel like the most important presence in his orbit for precisely as long as it served the evening's purpose. It was a skill he had learned before he had anything else to offer, back when presence was the only currency he possessed. Raymond fell into step beside him from the left. His voice dropping to the low, urgent register he reserved for genuine high-stakes moments. Raymond had been Davis's business partner for 11 years, which meant he had been in more rooms like this than almost anyone alive, and even he looked faintly electric tonight, his eyes moving across the crowd with the focused energy of a man watching something historic assemble itself in real time. He had a folded agenda in his left hand that he had already memorized and did not need, a habit from early days that he had never broken. Mercer's people confirmed 10 minutes ago, Raymond said, keeping his voice below the ambient noise of the room. All 4 principals are in the building. Davis, if this closes tonight, and it is going to close tonight, we are talking about the single largest private acquisition in the history of this state. Not this decade. The entire recorded history of private acquisition in Illinois. I know what it is, Davis said. I just want to make sure you're feeling. Raymond. Davis accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing server without breaking stride. I'm focused. Stop narrating. Raymond pressed his lips together and said nothing further, because 11 years had taught him the precise location of that line and he had just stepped over it. Renata appeared at Davis's left side, stepping smoothly out of a conversation with a city commissioner's wife, her fitted red dress catching the chandelier light as she moved through the crowd toward him. She was stunning in the way that certain women are stunning, not accidentally, but as the result of intention and complete understanding of the effect she produced in a room. She touched Davis's arm with the easy familiarity of someone who had learned his rhythms and knew when to appear and when to give him space. The lead woman from the Mercer group keeps looking over here, Renata said quietly, a small smile at the corner of her mouth. Every time someone mentions your name, she looks up. I think you make her nervous. Good, Davis said simply. Nervous people sign faster. Renata laughed softly. Raymond shook his head at the floor with the private expression of a man who had heard that line before and still found it accurate. Davis allowed himself the smallest fraction of a smile, because everything was exactly as it should be. The room was right. The people were right. The preparation had been thorough and the numbers were solid, and 6 months of relentless focus had produced this evening. And this evening was going to produce the deal, and the deal was going to produce a legacy that could not be touched or taken or walked away from. He set his water glass down on a passing tray and turned toward the east window to orient himself toward the Mercer table's position, already composing the first 3 sentences of his opening remarks in his mind, already 5 steps ahead of where his feet were standing, the way he always was, the way he had always needed to be. And then he stopped. Not slowed. Not hesitated. Stopped. The way a man stops when something seizes inside his chest and will not release, when his body registers something that his mind has not yet processed and refuses to take another step until the processing is complete. At the far end of the ballroom, near the last table by the service entrance, a figure in a blue and white uniform was bent over the white linen, a cleaning cloth moving in slow, careful circles across the surface. The room between them was full, 200 people in formal wear, a string quartet beginning to tune near the north wall, servers threading between tables with silver trays catching the light. But Davis saw none of it. His eyes had locked onto that figure the way a compass locks onto north. Helpless. Absolute. Without permission or explanation. The woman straightened slightly to reach the far edge of the table, and the movement shifted her profile into the warm chandelier light. And Davis saw it. The unmistakable round curve of her belly, full and undeniable beneath the blue uniform. 8 months, his mind said immediately, doing the arithmetic without being asked, arriving at the answer with the cold efficiency of a man who had spent 6 months trying not to do exactly this calculation. His water glass was gone from his hand. His opening remarks were gone from his mind. The Mercer deal, 40 floors of empire, Raymond's voice still somewhere at his shoulder, Renata's hand still resting on his arm. All of it was simply gone. Raymond looked over, and felt something drop in his stomach that he could not name, because in 11 years he had never once seen Davis Caldwell's face do what it was doing right now. Davis. He said it quietly, carefully, the way you speak to someone standing too close to an edge. Davis, what is it? What do you see? Davis didn't answer. He was already moving. He did not decide to move. His body simply went. Later, he would not be able to explain it. Not to Raymond, not to himself, not to anyone who asked. One moment he was standing by the east window with a room full of the most powerful people in Illinois arranged around him like confirmation of everything he had spent his life constructing. The next moment he was moving through them, weaving between conversations he had stopped hearing, past a server who stepped aside just in time, past a table of investors who turned to watch him go with expressions that shifted from curiosity to something closer to concern. Because Davis Caldwell did not move like this. Davis Caldwell was always the stillest person in any room he entered. Whatever was happening in his face right now, it was not the face they knew. The ballroom felt longer than it had ever been. Every step toward the far end felt like it was costing him something he could not afford to lose. The string quartet had begun playing near the north wall, and the music reached him in disconnected fragments that made no sense together. And the chandeliers seemed too bright, the room too warm, the crowd too dense. He kept his eyes on the blue and white uniform. He kept his eyes on the round curve of that belly pressing against the fabric. He counted the tables between them. 4, 3, 2. He stopped. 3 feet behind her. Close enough to see the loose strand of dark hair that had escaped her ponytail and fallen against the back of her neck. Close enough to see that her hands were moving more slowly than they should have been, the cloth making smaller and smaller circles, as though some part of her had already registered his presence and was trying to delay the moment of turning around for as long as physically possible. He opened his mouth. His voice came out lower than he intended, rougher, like it had been waiting 6 months to say this one syllable and had almost forgotten how. Caterina. The cloth stopped moving. The entire world stopped moving. She stood with her back to him and her hand flat on the table and her head down, and she did not turn and she did not speak, and that single terrible second stretched itself into something that felt like falling, that suspended breathless instant between the edge and the ground where the body understands what is coming before the mind has accepted it. Then slowly she straightened, and she turned. Davis had tried to prepare himself, in the 3 seconds it took her to turn, for whatever was coming. He had told himself it was not her. He had told himself that 6 months of missing someone could make a stranger into a ghost, could project a familiar face onto an unknown woman across a crowded room. He had told himself that even if it was her, he was ready. He was Davis Caldwell. He was always ready. He was not ready. Caterina looked at him the way you look at someone you loved so completely that loving them became its own kind of damage, and you spent every day after they were gone quietly repairing yourself, slowly and painfully, like setting a bone by hand, and you had almost finished. And then there they were again, standing 3 feet away, undoing everything in a single moment with the simple fact of their existence. Her face was composed. Her chin was level. She had clearly decided, in the seconds before she turned, that she was not going to fall apart in front of him. Not here. Not tonight. But her eyes told the truth that her face was working to suppress. They were exhausted in a way that sleep could not touch. The exhaustion of someone who had been carrying something enormous and invisible for a very long time, entirely without help. They were the eyes of a woman who had survived something, and knew she had survived it, and was not yet sure whether survival had been worth the cost. She was more beautiful than he remembered, and she looked like she had been through something he could not yet name but could feel the full terrible weight of, just standing this close to her. His gaze moved, involuntarily, to her belly, round and full and undeniable beneath the blue uniform. 8 months. The number landed in his chest like something dropped from a height. 8 months, which meant she had known when she left. She had been carrying his child when she placed her ring on the kitchen counter and walked out the door, and she had said nothing, and she had disappeared, and she had been carrying it alone through all the months that followed, and he had not known any of it. Davis! Her voice was quiet, professional, controlled with the specific precision of someone who has rehearsed for a moment and is using every resource available to execute the rehearsal. You should go back to your guests. He couldn't speak. His mouth was open and nothing was coming out, and he was standing in the middle of his own event, in the building that bore his name, with his whole carefully constructed evening dissolving around him like something that was never as solid as it appeared. Caterina, he finally said. The baby. Please. The word came out small, fractured at the very edge. The first crack in the composure she was holding with both hands. Please don't do this here. And then, before he could say another word, before he could reach for her or block her path or form a single coherent response. She turned toward the service corridor and walked away from him. Again. The silence spread outward from them like a fracture moving through glass. It started at the three nearest tables, conversations dropping mid-sentence, heads turning with the instinctive alertness of people who sense that something in a room has fundamentally shifted without yet knowing what. Then it moved further, carried by the turning of heads and the following of eyes, until fully a third of the ballroom had oriented itself toward the far end, where Davis Caldwell, host of the evening, architect of the most anticipated deal in Chicago this decade, was standing completely motionless in front of a pregnant woman in a cleaning uniform while she walked away from him. The string quartet trailed off uncertainly. Someone set a glass down too hard. A server stopped walking and simply stood. Raymond reached Davis's shoulder first, his voice dropping to the urgent low register reserved for genuine emergencies. The voice of a man watching something irreplaceable about to break and feeling powerless to stop it. Davis, the Mercer principals are watching. All four of them. You need to step back to the table right now and let me handle whatever this is. Davis, are you hearing me? Davis didn't hear him. He was looking at the service corridor door swinging shut behind Caterina, and something was tearing open inside his chest that 6 months of discipline and deal-making and deliberate forgetting had almost managed to seal permanently closed. Almost. He had always known, beneath the empire he kept building higher and higher like a wall against feeling, that it was never completely sealed. He heard Renata before he saw her. The sharp, precise rhythm of her heels crossing the marble floor cut through the ambient noise with the energy of someone who had made a decision before she finished crossing the room. She stopped at his side, her red dress blazing under the chandeliers, her voice measured but carrying an undercurrent that anyone within earshot could hear clearly. Who is she? Not a question. The tone of a woman assembling information she did not request and does not want. Renata! Davis! Her eyes moved to the service door and back to his face, reading it with the focused attention of someone who already knows the answer and needs him to confirm it. Who is that woman? The room was listening. Renata made a sound beside him, short and sharp like something load-bearing giving way. That is your wife. The words came out flat and certain. That is her. The one who left you. Her voice climbed one precise degree, the careful control beginning to slip at the edges. She is pregnant, Davis. She is very, very pregnant. And you are standing there looking at her like she is the only person in this room. Tears appeared in her eyes. Not soft tears, but the bright, hard tears of a woman who is furious and wounded in equal measure and will not pretend otherwise. How long have you known she was here? I didn't know. Then why do you look like everything just ended? Security arrived, 2 of them large and discreet, materializing at the edge of the gathering with the practiced neutrality of men trained to de-escalate without creating additional spectacle. One of them looked at Caterina with the careful blankness of professional assessment. Ma'am, perhaps we can. She's not going anywhere. The words came out of Davis with a quiet authority that stopped both men where they stood as completely as if he had raised a hand. He turned to Caterina directly, and something in his expression, stripped of performance, stripped of the careful management he applied to every other interaction in every other room, made Raymond close his eyes briefly, because it was not the face of a CEO protecting an asset. It was the face of a man who had just understood the full and irreversible cost of something he could not undo, and was no longer interested in pretending otherwise. 5 minutes, Davis said to her, low and direct. That is all I am asking. 5 minutes, and I will never ask you for another thing in my life. Caterina looked at him for a long and terrible moment, her hand resting on her belly, her eyes holding everything she was not yet ready to say. The entire ballroom held its breath around them like a crowd at the edge of something. Then she turned and walked through the service door. Davis looked back, at Raymond's stricken face, at the unsigned merger documents waiting on the table by the east window, at Renata standing in her red dress with tears on her cheeks and fury in her eyes, at 200 witnesses who would be discussing this moment over breakfast tomorrow morning. He followed her. The door swung shut behind him and the ballroom disappeared. Not gradually. Completely. One step through that door and 40 floors of curated elegance simply ceased to exist. The chandeliers, the white linen, the The string quartet, 200 people holding a collective breath. All of it replaced instantly by bare concrete walls under humming fluorescent tubes, the smell of industrial cleaning solution and something metallic beneath it, rolling supply carts parked against the wall with their mops and their folded blue rags, the kind of infrastructure that kept a building like this functioning invisibly so that the people on the other side of that door never had to think about it. Davis stopped for just a moment, disoriented by the totality of the contrast. This was his building. His name was on the outside of it. He had stood in this tower's lobby 100 times and felt the particular satisfaction of a man who had built something permanent. And he had never once been in this corridor. He had never had any reason to be. Caterina had clearly been here many times. She was already 15 feet ahead of him, moving with a speed that should not have been possible at 8 months pregnant, navigating the corridor with the automatic ease of someone who had memorized every turn. Left at the supply closet, right at the laundry cart, straight through the double doors marked staff only in peeling red letters. Davis followed, his dress shoes loud on the concrete in a way that his Italian leather was never loud anywhere else. The sound of a man who did not belong in this part of the world he owned. She pushed through a heavy fire door. He followed her into the stairwell. She was waiting for him. That was what stopped him. She had chosen this spot deliberately. She had turned to face him on the landing between the 39th and 40th floors, her back straight, her supply cart abandoned in the corridor behind, her hands at her sides. She was not cowering. She was not fragile. She was standing in that stairwell the way a woman stands when she has survived something enormous entirely by herself and the surviving has become a kind of armor she wears without thinking. Her eyes were steady and dark and burning with something that Davis recognized after a moment as fury. Not the hot explosive kind, but the cold compressed kind, the kind that has been pressurized over months and months into something far more controlled and therefore far more dangerous. Go back to your event, Davis. I'm not going back. You have 200 people in that room. You have a merger that Raymond has been calling the deal of the decade. You have a woman out there who came with you tonight and is probably standing in that ballroom right now wondering what just happened to her evening. I don't care about any of that right now. The words landed between them in the bare concrete stairwell and Caterina looked at him as though he had said something in a language she did not trust herself to translate accurately. Her jaw tightened. Her hand moved to her belly. Not for effect, not dramatically, just the involuntary protective gesture of a woman who had been making that same movement alone for 6 months and had long since stopped noticing she was doing it. You don't get to say that, she said quietly. You don't get to walk away from the most important night of your career and announce that you don't care, as if that makes you noble, as if that repairs something. I'm not trying to be noble. I'm trying to understand what happened to you, what happened to us. Nothing happened to us. Her voice cracked on the last word and she hated it. Davis could see her hate it, could see her work to pull the fracture closed before it widened into something she could not manage. I made a decision. I left. That is the complete story. That is not the complete story and we both know it. Davis took one careful step forward. She did not step back. She held her ground with her chin level and her eyes direct. And somehow that steadiness undid him more thoroughly than any display of emotion could have. Caterina, you were my wife. You were in my life every day. And then you were gone. And for 6 months I have been. He stopped, made himself steady. I came home to your ring on the counter. Do you have any understanding of what that did to me? Something moved through her eyes. Fast. Gone before he could name it or hold it. You look tired, he said. And his voice dropped into something unguarded that he had not planned. You look like you haven't slept properly in months. Your hands? He stopped himself, looking at her hands, at the raw knuckles and the small marks that came from hard physical work, and something in his expression changed in a way he could not control. Don't, she said, sharp, a wall going up in real time. Don't look at me like that. Don't you dare feel sorry for me in this stairwell when you had every opportunity, every single opportunity, to. She stopped herself. Her breath came slightly faster. Her hand pressed flat against her belly and stayed there. Then she went very still. The color left her face in a single wave. Her left hand shot out and gripped the stairwell railing with white-knuckled force. Her eyes closed for 3 full seconds with an expression that sent ice moving through Davis's chest in a way that nothing else that evening had managed. Caterina. He was beside her before the thought completed. What is it? What's wrong? Her eyes opened. They found his, and for the first time since she had turned around at that table, the composure was completely, utterly gone. Something's not right, she whispered. He had his phone out before she finished the sentence. I'm calling an ambulance. No. Her voice was sharp despite everything, despite the pain moving across her face in visible waves. No ambulance. No sirens. No spectacle. She breathed through it, slow and deliberate. Her eyes closed, one hand on the railing and one pressed flat against her belly. Just give me a moment. One moment. Davis stood beside her with his phone in his hand and his heart in his throat and every instinct screaming at him to act, to fix, to deploy every resource immediately. He made himself wait. He had spent 3 years not waiting when she needed him to wait. He could give her this. She opened her eyes. Steadier barely but enough. It passes. It's been happening. The doctor said. She stopped. Recalibrated. It passes. You have a doctor, he said carefully. Of course I have a doctor. A good one. Something moved across her face. Not quite an answer, not quite a deflection. The specific expression of a person who has been making do and has grown skilled enough at it that the difference between making do and being genuinely all right has become difficult to locate. Davis filed the expression away. He would return to it. He sat down on the step beside her. Not close enough to crowd her. Close enough that she would know he was not leaving. The concrete was cold through his suit trousers. He did not register it at all. Caterina. He kept his voice level. The voice he used when something mattered too much for volume. Whose baby is it? The stairwell went absolutely still. She did not look at him for a long moment. She looked at her hands, folded over the curve of her belly, the knuckles raw from months of this work, and Davis looked at those same hands and felt something move through him that had no single name. Grief and fury and tenderness arriving simultaneously from different directions, combining into something he had no framework for. Then she looked up, directly at him. No flinching. Yours, she said. The word hit him like a physical force, landing in his sternum and traveling outward through his entire body. He felt it in his hands. He felt it in his throat. He sat on that concrete step in his own building and could not produce a single sound for what felt like a very long time. His mouth opened. Nothing came. He pressed his fist briefly against his lips and looked at the floor and breathed. Simply breathed. While the full weight of that single word rearranged everything he had believed he understood about the last 6 months of his life. His child. She had been carrying his child through all of it. The empty apartment, the ring on the counter, the 6 months of silence, the cleaning uniform, the fluorescent corridors, the stairwells and the supply carts. All of it. With his child inside her. Alone. When did you find out? He said. His voice came out unsteady in a way he made no effort to correct. About a week before I left. He turned to look at her. A week. He did the arithmetic again with full knowledge this time, and the number landed with fresh devastation. Caterina, why didn't you tell me? I would have. Would you have? Not a question. A weight set carefully on the step between them, asking him to look at it honestly before he answered. Of course I would have. You are my wife. If I had known you were pregnant I would have. Davis. Her voice was quiet, patient in the way of someone who has rehearsed a conversation 100 times in an empty room and has finally arrived at the real version of it. Do you remember the last conversation we had about Vivian? The name landed in the stairwell like a stone dropped into still water. Davis opened his mouth and closed it, and the silence that followed was not the silence of a man searching for the right words. It was the silence of a man who had just heard a door open on a room he had kept locked for a very long time, and recognized with cold and absolute certainty exactly what was waiting inside it. Caterina watched his face. She said nothing. She didn't need to. His silence had already answered everything. She started at the beginning. That was how Davis knew she had been holding this for a very long time. Not the emotion of it, but the order. The terrible, methodical order of a woman who had sorted through her own pain so many times in solitude that she could now lay it out like documented evidence on a table, piece by piece, without flinching. She had rehearsed this. She had lived with this organized and ready, in case the day ever came when she could finally say it to the one person who needed to hear it. The first dinner. 8 months into their marriage. A family gathering at Vivian's Gold Coast townhouse. Caterina had arrived to find the seating rearranged. Her name card moved from Davis's right side, where it had always been placed, to the far end of the table between two distant cousins who spent the entire evening talking across her as though she were a pleasant piece of furniture. Davis had been at the head of the table beside his sister, laughing, present in the way he was always present in rooms where he felt completely at ease. He had looked down the table at Caterina once. Just once. She had smiled back so he would not worry. She had done that a great deal, she said, her voice perfectly even. Smiled so he would not worry. The charity gala the following spring. Vivian moving through the crowd with Davis at her side, introducing him to a woman named Sloane. Beautiful, well-connected, the kind of Chicago family name that opened the same doors as Caldwell, while Caterina stood 2 feet to Davis's left holding a champagne glass she had stopped drinking from. Vivian had not introduced Caterina. Not an oversight. Vivian did not make oversights. She had simply continued the conversation as though the woman her brother had married was pleasant background detail, not worth the breath of an introduction. Davis remembered that gala. He remembered thinking Caterina had seemed quiet on the drive home. He had assumed she was tired. The comments came next, and Caterina delivered them without drama, which made each one worse than the last. The observation at Thanksgiving that Caterina's accent, she had grown up in Pilsen, the southwest side, a neighborhood that Vivian's world carried opinions about, made her difficult to follow in large groups. The remark at a family birthday that her dress was lovely, such a bold choice for her figure. The question asked once in front of 3 family members, delivered with a smile so warm it could not be challenged, about whether Caterina had ever considered finishing her degree. Because it was never too late, Vivian had said, and education mattered so much, especially for someone hoping to raise children in this family. Each one a small cut. Each one deniable in isolation. Together, over months and then years, they had done the work Vivian had designed them to do. Made Caterina feel smaller, stranger, less certain of her right to occupy the space she was in, until the woman who had married Davis Caldwell with her chin up and her eyes open had gradually, almost imperceptibly, learned to make herself as unobtrusive as possible in her own marriage. And Davis had seen none of it. Davis had been in New York, in London, in meetings and cars and conference calls, building and building and building, trusting that the people he loved were fine because no one had used explicit words to tell him otherwise. Then Caterina said the words that made the concrete step feel like it dropped beneath him. The lunch. 14 months ago. Vivian had called it a girls' afternoon. Her phrase, delivered warmly, as though she were offering something rather than constructing something. Just the 2 of them at a private dining room at the university club. White tablecloths, afternoon light, a bottle of wine that cost more than Caterina's first car. Vivian had been gracious throughout the entire meal. Interested, almost warm, asking questions about Caterina's life before Davis with what appeared to be genuine curiosity. And then, over the second glass, she had set her wine down and folded her hands on the table and told Caterina, in a voice of complete and pleasant calm, that she was prepared to transfer $800,000 into any account Caterina chose, in exchange for a quiet and uncontested end to the marriage. Davis stopped breathing. She said you deserved better? Caterina continued, her voice still steady, though her hands had tightened in her lap. She said it with what seemed like genuine feeling, as though she was doing me the kindness of explaining what I was too foolish to see for myself. She said I could take the money, build a good life somewhere else, and everyone could move forward cleanly. Caterina, you came home that night. Her eyes found his and held them without wavering. You asked how the lunch was. Do you remember what I said? He did. He remembered precisely. He had been distracted, half his attention still on a conference call that had run long, and she had said fine, everything was fine, and he had kissed her forehead and gone back to his phone and accepted that answer without question because accepting it cost him absolutely nothing. I tried to tell you, she said, and her voice finally, just barely, began to fracture at the edges. Not collapse, fracture like a hairline crack in something that had been holding enormous pressure for too long. Davis, I tried so many times. Every time I started, you found a way to redirect the conversation. She means well, you would say. She is just protective. She loves you in her own way. You always had a reason. You always had a way of making me feel that what I was experiencing wasn't quite what I thought it was. She stopped. Her breath caught. Her hand pressed against her belly and stayed. And eventually I stopped trying. Because trying cost more than I had left to spend. She looked at him then with the full weight of everything she had just said sitting in the stairwell air between them. And the look on her face was not anger, and it was not grief. It was something far harder to witness, the expression of a woman who had finally said the true thing, after years of carrying it alone, and was not yet sure whether saying it would change a single thing that had already happened. She was quiet for a long moment after that, gathering herself. Then she began again, and her voice had dropped into something quieter and more precise, and Davis understood immediately that whatever she was about to say was the part she had saved for last. The part she had carried longest and heaviest and most carefully of all. 5 weeks pregnant. That was how far along she had been when it happened. 5 weeks, which meant she had known for less than 2 weeks, which meant she was still in that early private wonder of it. The kind you hold against your chest before telling anyone. The kind that is entirely yours for a little while before it belongs to the world. She had been thinking about how to tell him. She had been planning the right moment, choosing the right words. She had been happy, she said, in a voice so brief and unguarded that Davis felt it pass through him like something sharp. She had been genuinely, quietly happy, for the first time in longer than she wanted to admit. Davis had been in New York for 4 days, a development deal that required his physical presence. 3 meetings back to back. The kind of trip he made 6 times a year without thinking twice about the leaving. The morning after he landed in New York, Vivian had let herself into their apartment with the key she had held since Davis bought the building. She had let herself in the way she always had, with ownership, with the unquestioned confidence of someone who has never been asked to knock. Caterina had answered the door in her robe, coffee in hand, wholly unprepared. Vivian had been immaculate. Cream wool coat, pearl earrings. The composure of a woman who had prepared carefully for a meeting she had every intention of winning. She had asked, pleasantly, if she could come in. She had accepted a cup of coffee. She had sat down at the kitchen table where Davis and Caterina ate breakfast together on the mornings he was home, and she had reached into her bag and placed a document folder on the table between them. The folder was thick, professionally bound. It bore the name of one of the 3 most powerful family law practices in Illinois on the cover. Inside were 47 pages of financial records, bank transfers, account statements, transaction histories going back 18 months, all of it suggesting, with the clean authoritative language of documented evidence, that Caterina had been systematically moving money from a joint account linked to Davis's primary holdings. Small amounts at first, building to larger ones, a pattern that told the story of a woman quietly constructing an exit fund at her husband's expense. Every single page was fabricated, built from real account numbers and real dates and real transaction formats, assembled by people who knew their work and had been compensated well for it. Vivian had let her read it, had sat across the kitchen table with her coffee cup and given her the full time to understand what she was looking at. And then, in the same tone she might use to discuss a menu selection or a board meeting agenda, she had explained what would happen next. She had 3 family court judges in her personal contact list, 2 state's attorneys who owed the Caldwell family significant consideration, a legal team that had already reviewed the documents and confirmed readiness to proceed at her instruction. No court in Illinois, no judge, no arbitrator, no legal body in this state would award custody of a Caldwell heir to a woman carrying a financial fraud record. The child would be raised within the family, properly, with the name and the resources and the environment a Caldwell child deserved. And Caterina would lose everything she was carrying, including the right to watch that child take its first steps, speak its first words, grow into a person, unless she made a different choice. The different choice was to leave, quietly, quickly, and without making any legal claim of any kind. If she did that, Vivian would ensure the documents were never filed. The fabricated evidence would disappear. No charges, No proceedings, no custody battle. Just absence, the same clean total absence Caterina had always felt in this family, now made permanent and mutual. No one would look for her. No one would follow. She had 4 days to decide. Then Vivian picked up her coffee cup, rinsed it at the sink with the unhurried ease of someone with nowhere pressing to be, and left. Caterina left on the 4th day. The stairwell was absolutely silent when she finished. Davis was sitting forward with his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands, and he was shaking. Not visibly, not in any way that the room could see, but the deep interior shaking of a man whose entire understanding of his own life has just been dismantled and rebuilt from the foundation up, and the new version is unrecognizable and monstrous, and he cannot look away from it. His sister. His older sister, who had taught him to ride a bike on the street outside their mother's house. Who had co-signed his first business loan when no bank in the city would return his calls. Who had stood in the front row at his wedding with tears running down her face. Tears he had believed completely, and without question were the tears of a woman who loved him and wished him well. He lifted his face from his hands slowly. His eyes found Caterina's. And what she saw in them made her go very still, because it was not guilt and it was not sorrow. It was something colder and more absolute than either of those things. Something that had been absent for a very long time and had just finally arrived. "Where are the documents?" he said quietly. "Does she still have copies?" She had kept photographs of every page on her phone. She told him that steadily, without drama. Everything Vivian had placed on that kitchen table, she had captured before she packed a single item of clothing. She had been carrying that record for 6 months as insurance against a future she had hoped would never arrive. Davis nodded. He filed it, and then he set it aside because there was something that had to happen before strategy, before lawyers, before any of the machinery already assembling itself in the back of his mind. Something he owed her that no legal action could substitute for, and he had made her wait long enough. He straightened on the concrete step. He looked at her directly, and he said it without qualification, without preamble, without the instinct to contextualize or condition that had governed nearly every difficult conversation of his adult life. He had failed her. Not Vivian. Not the marriage in the abstract. Him, personally, specifically, with full knowledge of what the words carried. He had failed her completely. She had been disappearing inside their life one small piece at a time, growing quieter at dinners, returning from lunches with her eyes somewhere distant, reaching toward conversations that he had turned away from because turning away was so much less costly than what the conversations might require of him. He had watched her become smaller in rooms where she should have been entirely safe, and he had called it adjustment. He had told himself she was introverted. He had told himself she needed time. He had told himself the things that were free and required nothing, and allowed him to return to his work with a clean conscience he had not earned. Every time she had tried to speak about Vivian, and he could see them now with punishing clarity, those moments, her choosing her words carefully at the kitchen counter, at the bedroom door, in the car on the way home from events, he had redirected. Gently, reasonably, with the practiced ease of a man who had decided, without ever admitting the decision, that his sister's stability was a foundation he could not afford to disturb. He had called that loyalty. He had called it trust. He had handed her those words like they were something of value when they were armor. Protection for himself, constructed entirely at her expense. He said all of it, plainly, without softening a single edge. Caterina sat very still throughout, her hands in her lap, her face doing something complicated and private that she could not fully suppress. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment, and then she asked him the question he had known was coming and had been hoping she would ask anyway, because she deserved to ask it and he deserved to have to answer it. If she had stayed, she said. If she had come to him that morning after Vivian left and put those documents on the kitchen table and said everything, would he have believed her? The concrete walls waited. The fluorescent light hummed steadily overhead. Davis opened his mouth, and did the thing that cost him more than anything else he had said on that landing. He told her the truth. He did not know. He said it plainly, without flinching, without softening it into something easier to receive. He did not know. He wanted to say yes, of course, immediately, without question. But he had spent the last hour being honest, and he was not going to stop now. Not with this, not with her. The man he had been 6 months ago had a sister he trusted without reservation and a wife whose increasing unhappiness he had been quietly, consistently deprioritizing for 2 years. That man might have believed her. He might also have called Vivian within the hour. He might have looked at those fabricated documents and felt the terrible pull of doubt settle in before the pull of loyalty could overcome it. He genuinely did not know what he would have done, and she deserved that honesty more than she deserved a comfortable answer that served his own need to appear better than he had been. Something shifted in Caterina's face when he said it. Not softening exactly. Something closer to recognition. The expression of a person who has waited a very long time to be told the truth and finds, upon receiving it, that even a painful truth is less exhausting than a beautiful lie told with good intentions. He leaned forward. His voice dropped into something quiet and irreversible, the voice of a man making the only promises he had earned the right to make. What he could promise, what he was promising, here, now, in this stairwell on this landing with the city burning 40 floors below them, was that Vivian would never come near her or this child again. That every fabricated document would be met by lawyers more capable and more expensive than anything his sister had assembled. That he would spend whatever resources were required and however many years it took to earn the right to be present for this child. And for her, if she could ever, if there was any possibility that she might one day allow. His voice gave out on him. Just for a moment. He let it. Caterina's eyes were very bright. She pressed her lips together. Her hand moved to her belly in that familiar gesture, and something in her face changed. A softening so small and so hard one that Davis almost missed it. But he was watching very carefully. He saw it. And then her expression shifted entirely. The color drained from her face in a single wave. Her hand pressed harder against her belly, and her other hand found the railing and gripped it with a force that whitened her knuckles. Davis! Barely above a whisper. Call someone right now. The baby? She exhaled sharply, her whole body tightening around the pain. Something is wrong. Something is really wrong. He had his phone out before she finished. 3 calls. For minutes. Standing on that landing with his back to the ballroom 40 floors above and his entire life reorganized around a single irreducible point. The Langham Chicago First, presidential suite, immediate occupancy, service entrance arrival, nothing visible, no press, no lobby. Then Dr. Anita Reeves, the top maternal fetal specialist in the city, a woman who had managed the most complex high-risk pregnancies in Illinois for the past decade. She answered in 2 rings and said she would be at the hotel within the hour. Then Gerald. Gerald picked up on the first ring, as he always had in 11 years without exception. Loading dock, Davis said. 10 minutes. Come alone. He put the phone in his pocket and looked at Caterina. She was watching him with an expression that had not fully resolved itself. Not gratitude, not resistance, something more careful and provisional than either. The expression of a woman deciding, in real time, how much she was willing to allow, and which parts of the wall she had built could be temporarily lowered without compromising the whole structure. I'm not going back upstairs, she said. I know. I'm not going to your apartment. The Langham. Your name on the room. Every condition yours to set. I will stay in the corridor if that is what you want. A silence. She looked at the floor between them and he could see her weighing it. The exhaustion against the pride she had fought for, the fear for the baby against 6 months of survival she had constructed without him. The woman who had learned to need nothing from him against the woman who was 8 months pregnant and had just gone pale in a stairwell and was still, underneath every layer of armor, frightened in a way that no amount of courage could fully conceal. I set every condition, she said finally. Every one. You don't enter the room unless I ask you to. Understood. And tomorrow is not determined by tonight. Tonight is only tonight. Yes, Davis said. Tonight is only tonight. She nodded once. Then she pushed carefully off the railing and he moved to her side. Not taking her arm, just close enough that she could reach for him if she chose to, leaving the decision entirely and completely hers. She didn't take his arm, but she didn't move away from him either. They walked down the remaining stairs together, and Davis pushed open the heavy door at the bottom and held it, and neither of them looked back up toward the 40th floor. The service elevator was large and harshly lit and they rode it down without speaking. Davis watched the floor numbers descend and thought, briefly, about the merger documents on the table by the east window, the unsigned papers that represented the single largest private acquisition in the recorded history of Illinois, the deal he had spent 6 months building toward, and found, to his own quiet astonishment, that the thought produced nothing in him. No anxiety. No calculation. No loss. Whatever that deal had meant an hour ago, it meant considerably less than the sound of Caterina breathing steadily beside him. Gerald was at the loading dock when the doors opened, exactly where Davis had asked him to be, standing beside the black car under the yellow overhead light with his hands folded and his face arranged in the careful neutrality of a man who had driven this family through 11 years of everything and understood that certain moments required silence above all other responses. When he saw Caterina, the neutrality shifted for just a fraction of a second. Something moved through his eyes, quick and layered and containing more history than a single expression could carry, and then he stepped forward and opened the rear door without a word. He did not look at Davis with accusation. He looked at him with the expression of a man who had quietly hoped for this specific moment for longer than Davis had known. Caterina lowered herself into the back seat. Davis got in on the other side. Gerald closed both doors and the city sounds disappeared, replaced by the soft dark interior of the car, moving out of the loading dock and into the Chicago night. They did not touch. They did not speak. The skyline moved past the windows in slow gold and silver, the same skyline Davis had spent his entire adult life trying to be worthy of, and it had never looked the way it looked right now. Not triumphant, not aspirational, just witness, just light against darkness, just the city continuing enormous and indifferent, while two people sat in its moving quiet and breathed the same air for the first time in 6 months. Caterina's hand rested on her belly. Her eyes were on the window. Davis watched her reflection in the glass, the exhaustion in it, and beneath the exhaustion, something that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with the child she had protected at every possible cost to herself. She was still here, after everything. After Vivian's precision cruelty and his own years of looking away and 6 months of stairwells and cleaning uniforms and making do. She was still here, and so was his child, and the night was not over, and tomorrow was not decided. And that was more than he deserved, and he knew it without reservation. Gerald's eyes found his in the rearview mirror, just briefly. Davis gave the smallest nod. Then Caterina spoke quietly, to the window rather than to him, in the voice of someone saying something they had not entirely planned to say. She told me you would never believe me, she said. Vivian. She said you would always choose her in the end. That she knew you better than anyone living, and you would never, not once, not for anything, put me first. A pause. The city moved past. She was so certain, Davis. She said it the way people say things they have already proven to themselves beyond any doubt. The car was quiet. Was she right? Caterina asked softly. Davis looked at the city he had built his name into, at the woman beside him who had survived the worst of what his blindness had permitted. At the question that was the only one that had ever actually mattered, asked in a voice so quiet it barely disturbed the air between them. He had no answer that was sufficient. He had only the truth and the promise, and the long and costly work of proving, one day at a time, one choice at a time, that Vivian had been wrong. He was terrified it would not be enough. He was going to spend everything he had trying anyway. The Langham came into view through the windshield. And in the quiet back seat of that car, 40 floors below the life he had walked away from, Davis Caldwell understood that the most important negotiation of his life had not happened in that ballroom tonight. It was happening right here, in the dark, in the silence, in the space between two people who had not yet decided what came next. And unlike every other deal he had ever closed, this one came with no contract, no guarantee, and no safety net. Only the work, only the showing up. Only the daily decision to become the man she had once believed he might be. He prayed, for the first time in longer than he could remember, that he was not already too late. And that, friends, is where we leave Davis and Caterina tonight. Not with a reunion, not with a resolution, but with a question still alive in the Chicago air, and a man who finally, after all this time, understands what he nearly lost forever. If the story moved something in you, if you felt every single moment of it, Please hit that like button right now and subscribe to our channel so you are here for every story we tell. We want to hear from you in the comments. Do you believe Davis can truly earn Caterina's trust back? Should she give him that chance? Or has too much already been broken? Drop your answer below. We read every single one. Thank you so much for watching tonight. We will see you in the very next story.